So when I looked at Daniel and looked at these four Hebrew boys, I wanted to go back to chapter 1 because we need to know the story before the promotion. In chapter 6, Daniel and his other three friends are getting ready to be promoted. But in chapter 1 through 5, it tells the story as to how they got to the point of being promoted. And everybody online tonight, if you've been promoted by God, you ought to have a story. So if you will, let's look at the story here in chapter 1. Come with me, if you will, tonight. Come with me. I know you've already read chapter 6, but I want us to know how did we get to chapter 6. So come with me to chapter 1, if you will, and let's tell the story as to what happened to Daniel and his other three friends. The Bible said here in chapter 1, in verse 1, it said, in the third year of the reign of King Jehoash, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem to besiege it. They came to Jerusalem and they besieged the city. In verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, unto his hand. Now, who was it that allowed Jerusalem to be not only besieged, but also who was it that allowed uh, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to be able to take the children of Israel away? The Bible said here in verse 2, and it said, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, unto his hands. Can we put a pin here tonight? We be wondering why stuff has happened to us. God has a purpose for everything. And Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon couldn't have did anything to Jerusalem or its people unless God allowed it to happen. Verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried unto the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels unto the treasure, the house of his little OG, little God. Well, why would God allow them to take the vessels out of the holy house and take it down that served out of God? God has a reason for everything that he'll allow to happen. A lot of times we be wondering and looking at, now surely God is not going to let them get away with this. Or God not going to let them get away with that. Everything that God does is for a purpose. And if we can trust God to know that, Lord, I don't understand it right now, but I know you, God. I know you're always God, and you're a God that always has a plan. And sometimes God will use us to teach a lesson to the enemy. How can we teach a lesson to the enemy? By being uh, uh, faithful to God no matter what's going on. So when I looked at this lesson, I went down to verse 3 in chapter 1 in the book of Daniel. And the Bible said here, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain children of Israel in of the king's seed and of the princes. Now, they came to Jerusalem, but they was looking for a certain type of people to take back with them. They didn't want just know anybody. They came looking for the best, the best that's in the holy nation of Israel. They came to look for those who was crafty and who was smart, that they can take from God's people and make gain for themselves. Verse 4 said, the children in whom was no blemish, and well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, those that were smart and full of wisdom, and understanding science, and such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, in whom they may teach the learning in the tongue of the Chaldeans. They were looking for the folk that had it going on. That they were looking for the folk that were well educated, those who could stand in the king's palace and they could talk and explain themselves. And they was looking for those that they could take of the goods of God's people. and use them for their own selfish need. And just like the devil, he'll come and get some of the best of us and try to use us for his own selfish need. But now ain't nothing wrong. I'm gonna say this again tonight. Ain't nothing wrong with God allow the devil to come and take us away when we bona fide in him. Why would I say that? Because God has a purpose for us. That when we get to the devil's territory, when we get to the enemy's territory, God has a plan for us through him to show the enemy what kind of God we serve. And as I was looking at this, I went down to verse 5. Look what the Bible said here. And the king appointed them. Well, let me go back to verse 4. It said, the children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such had ability in them, to stand in the king's palace, in whom they may teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And in verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provisions of the king's meat and of wine, which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years. Can we put a pin here tonight? The king Nebuchadnezzar, the enemy of Israel, he didn't mind spending money on God's children. He didn't mind giving them the best. It wasn't for their good. He was doing it for his good. And a lot of times the enemy will come to us and try to act like they mean us some good. Try to act like they'll give you and offer you the world. They'll offer you the best of the best. But always know that the enemy got an underlying motive in what he's doing. This king wasn't feeding them the best just to give them the best. He wanted something in return. And that's just like the enemy today. Whenever he come after us, and he know we the best of the best for God. When we are bona fide and we're walking with God, and he started offering us things, then we got to understand and know it's not going to be for our good. The devil always has a plan. I went down to verse 6. Look what it says in verse 6. It says, now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It points out 4 of the Hebrew young men, the 4 Hebrew boys. Look at verse 7. Unto whom the prince of the eunuch gave name. He changed their names. Now the names was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But look what the king changed their name to in verse 7. He gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. He changed their names. But just because somebody changed their name, don't mean that we can have to allow them, even in slavery, to change who we are. Many people have been in slavery and their names have been changed. But this did not change who they were because their name was changed. If you're a child of God, your name could be anything, as long as we keep walking and being a child of God. And a lot of times we know that even in our own history, that names were changed, but it did not change who we were on the inside. People still had to live, they had to prosper, they had to go forward, and they had to deal with the situation in which they were put. I looked at verse 8 and look what it said in verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not be defiled with the portions of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the princes of the eunuch that he might not defile himself. Now, can we put a pin here tonight? Daniel said, I'm not going to eat what they are giving me. Daniel said, I want to go on a fast. All I want, and I'm going to prove here to show you that the God I serve, if I follow him, he'll make me look better in 10 days than all the other ones that is eating the meat from Nebuchadnezzar's table. Verse 8, but Daniel purposed his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested. Can I put another pin in here tonight? Because see, even though they was in bondage, Daniel had the nerve to request. And I want to say this tonight. We ought to start having the nerve to request. When we're following God, look here, act like we following God. We don't have to follow the rules of the devil. When the devil is trying to get us in bondage, act like we serve somebody else other than those who have us captive. Daniel spoke with authority. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to do this. Look what Daniel said in verse 10, verse 11. Then Daniel said to Melchizedek, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, prove thou servants, I beseech thee, for 10 days. He said, give us 10 days. And all we don't want no wine. We don't want no meat from the king's table and all this other stuff that he caviar. We don't want none of that stuff. All we want is beans and water. Beans to eat and water to drink. And Daniel said, in 10 days, I'll prove to you that God is with us. Look at verse 13. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and thou countenance of thy children that eat of the portions of the meat of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with our servant. I'm going to know that God will show them that he can do more with less. They asked for a smaller portion of what the king was willing to give them. And Daniel trusted God, that God would do more with them and to them with the less than what the king was giving them more. And we have to know and trust God that, look, when the odds is against us, know that God can do more for us. Look at verse 14. So he consented to them in this matter. Now, the God that was over them, he listened to Daniel. Why? Because Daniel spoke up and Daniel challenged him. And Daniel said, now sometimes ain't nothing wrong. I ain't gonna say sometimes, all the time ain't nothing wrong with us challenging the enemy, especially when we were trying to walk with God. Daniel challenged him. Look at verse 15. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fair and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. In 10 days, they were looking far better than those eating just beans and drinking water, than them that was eating the meat and everything else they wanted from the king's table. And I want to say this tonight, God will make a difference if we take a stand. Look at verse 16. Thus Melchizedek took away the portions of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them beans. After their God seen that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego's God favored them, and Daniel favored them, he did and gave them their request, and just gave them beans to eat and water to drink. I went down to verse 17. Now the reputation of Daniel in Babylon is getting ready to grow. They knew they was dealing with somebody now that spoke with authority, spoke with power. Daniel knew who he was. Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego. These 4 young men knew who they was in God. And when you know who you are with God, you can speak with authority. And not only speak with authority, but look, you can talk to the enemy and challenge the enemy as to who your God is. I went down to verse 18. It said, watch this. It said, now at the end of the 10 days that the king had said he should bring them in, the prince of the eunuch brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Now the prince brought them in and let them stood before Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 19, and the king communed with them, he talked with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Out of all the other children that they brought, to Nebuchadnezzar, to Babylon. None was found like those who took a stand with God. And I had to put a pin here too in verse 17. I got to go back because the Bible says, for as these four children, they wasn't men, they was boys, they was children, but yet they took a stand no matter what. And what I'm saying to the young folk that's online tonight, you learn how to take a stand for God, no matter where the devil has taken you, what territory that you're in, take a stand for righteousness' sake. I know going to be some folks that's going to try to get you to do this wrong and come over. It don't matter. We're going to go over here and we're going to do that. But no, you take a stand for God, and God will take a stand for you. I went down to verse 20 and said, in all manners of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all of the musicians, the astrologers that was in his realm. When the king started to question them to see the intelligence that they had and who they were, and what did they have to work with about themselves. He said, these four men, young men that stood for their God, they were 10 times better than anybody that I have in my kingdom. And so what am I saying tonight? If we take a stand for God, God would take a stand for us. And he will give us the wisdom and the knowledge that we need to be able to deal with the enemy on their own territory, in their own territory, on their own ground. I went on down to chapter 2, if you will, and look what happens here in chapter 2. There's a challenge that's getting ready to come. And I wanted to go back and tell the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before we go back to chapter 6, because it's so important to know these young men's story before we get to their glory. And they had to go through some things to be able to prove themselves as to who they were. And who were they? They were children of God. I went down to chapter 2 and verse 1 and said, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream. Watch this tonight. Who sent the dream? It was God that sent the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep break from him. Now God sent something to him that broke his sleep. His spirit was troubled and he couldn't lay down. Won't God fix it for you? He'll let you go to sleep at night, but he'll keep your enemy up. Verse 2, then the king commanded to call the musicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dream. Now, he can call all his musicians, his astrologers, those who knew how to look at the sky and tell when it was going to rain, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, to show the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king. Verse 3, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream. And my spirit was troubled to know the dream, to understand the dream. And then in verse 4, it says, then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Zerach, O king, live forever. Tell the servant the dream, and we will show thee the interpretation. Well, look at verse 5, what the king did. The king told them in verse 5, he answered and said unto them, the Chaldeans, this thing is gone from me. If you would not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut up in pieces, and your house shall be made a dunghill. Now, how are they going to be able to tell the interpretation of the king's dream if the king is telling them he can't remember what the dream was? So now they're going to have to tell the interpretation of the dream, they're going to have to tell the king what the dream was. Then give the king the interpretation. Won't God mix it up for you when you need him to? Look at verse 6. But if they show the dream, but if they show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts, rewards, great honor. Now, this is the king that's speaking, and he's calling all of his smart folks together. If you can tell me the interpretation of this dream, I'm going to reward thee with great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. Verse 7. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation thereof. Now, they get mad at the king now because they knew they couldn't tell the interpretation. Look how their language and their speech turned to the king. Verse 8, the king answered and said, I know of a certainty that ye would gain the time because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if you would not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Now the king said, now if I had told you what the dream was, you could have told me anything about what your interpretation was, and there was nothing that I could speak against it. But if you can't tell me the dream and interpretation, then he said, look, you're gonna have some trouble coming your way. I went down to verse 9. He said, if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying, corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. If you can tell me the dream first, King said, I know you can tell me the interpretation. Because he said, look, you got something going on. If you can tell me what my dream was before I tell you what the dream was. But look, don't fear. If God be for you, who can be against you? I went down to verse 10. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man among the earth can show the king this matter. That they were speaking boldly. There's not a man on the earth can show the king this matter, but God. Look down at verse 11. And it's a rare thing that the king required. Now they kind of chastising their own king. It's a rare thing that the king would even ask us that. And there is none other than can show it before the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. Now, even they knew that there's a God whose dwelling is not with flesh. Even though they're recognizing that there is a higher power than the God, the little gods that they serve, then Astroth and all of these idol gods that they serve. They do recognize that there is a higher power. There is a higher God, but they choose not to serve it. And then look at verse 11. He said, it's a rare thing that the king required, and there is none other that can show before the king except the little gods, except the gods whose dwelling is not with the flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy the wise men of Babylon. But I thank God when I got down to verse 14. Look who speaks up. One of these four that follow God, these four Hebrew boys that stood with their God. And verse 14, then Daniel answered with the counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said unto Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty for the king? Why is it so urgent for the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. He explained it to Daniel what was going on and why the king needed to know it. Verse 16, then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation thereof. Now, can I put a pin here tonight? Because see, Daniel did not allow the devil to rush him. Daniel told him that he could give him the interpretation thereof, but Daniel was also letting him know, I need to seek my God. I need to have counsel with the El Shaddai, the Almighty God. And I tell you the interpretation of their dream. I went down to verse 18 and it said that they would desire that verse 17. Then Daniel went into his house and made the king known to Hananiah, made the matter known until Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companion. Verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven according to the secret. And Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. What did they do? they went in and they prayed together. Verse 19. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. When you don't know what else to do, what do you do? Somebody said you get on your knees and you have a talk with Jesus. You have a talk with God. And Daniel, he trusted God. He spoke up. He didn't know what God was going to do. But Daniel said, when I get through talking to God, I know God is going to do something. So Daniel trusted God and put his life on the line because Daniel said, I know God is going to let me down. Then walking with him and talking with him. And I've been obedient to him. And because I'm obedient to him, I know God is going to move on our situation. Verse 20, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might is his. And he changed the times and the seasons. He's talking about his God. He removed kings and set up kings. Daniel said, God is the king of all the earth. He removed earthly kings and set up earthly kings. And he giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. And he revealed the deep and the secret things. He knoweth what is in that darkness, and he know what dwelleth in the light with him. Because God know everything. And verse 23 will be carrying out tonight, but I want to look at this verse 23 real quick. Daniel talked to God, and I just want to look at this tonight because even in the midst of Daniel's trouble, and his friends, and the trials that they was going through, Daniel, he spoke up to the enemy. But when he got through speaking up to the enemy and taking his stand, look what Daniel did. Then he went back and started talking to his God. And that's what we have to do. We have to take a stand when it's time to take a stand. But don't go further than what God tell you to go. After he told the king what he wanted the king to know, then Daniel went back and talked to God. Verse 23, he said, I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God, of my fathers, who has given wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we desire of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us this matter. He said, God, I know you were going to give it to me. With you, there's always a way out. Thank you, God, for revealing to me what I needed to know. And I want to say this tonight as we get ready to go off the air. If we stick with God and stay with God long enough, it may not happen overnight. It may not happen in the twinkling of an eye. But if you're trusting God for something, don't walk away from what you're trusting God in. God don't move on our time. He don't move in our wisdom. So some things God gonna allow to happen to us that's gonna be not in our understanding. They didn't know and understand what God allowed them to be taken in by the enemy and carried off into a foreign country. But they weren't mad at God. They kept talking and trusting to God. So as we go off tonight, I don't know where you are now in your life, in your spiritual life, in your relationship with God. The enemy may have you bound. But always remember that if you stick with God, you might have to go through some trials and tribulations. You may have to endure some trials, some trouble. But in your trouble, know that God is still a deliverer. And we are going to make it tonight. We'll pick back up next week. But God is going to show them through trust, obedience, through faith, and through patience that he's a deliverer. And that's what we need to know. Have patience in God, have faith in God, trust in God, wait on God, and see what God do, what he said he would do. If you will tonight, I want to stop it here because I know our time is up. But this lesson about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, these four Hebrew boys, what God is getting ready to take them through. The story is not over, it's just beginning. They showed faith in God. And the more faith that you show in God, the more God will use you before your enemy. And they show faith in God. And God is really getting ready to do some miraculous things to show this Nebuchadnezzar who is God. of the heavens and earth. And not only that, but also to show the enemy that he got some folk that's going to stick with him through thick and thin, no matter what. Even when they look like there's not going to be any deliverance, they still is holding on and clinging on to the hand of God. And that's what God wants us to do. I don't know what situation you're in tonight, but just hold on and keep clinging to the hands of God, because God is a deliverer. So with that, we're going to open up our lines tonight, and we're going to ask, if you will, to come on and let's say our hellos and our goodbyes until God allow us to be back on next week, and as we come back.